China owns the United States.
Republicans in Congress are hashing out a new tax cut and spending bill that's projected to add trillions to the national debt.
When we were there the other day, the debt clock said our country owed $35 trillion, $903 billion, $414 million.
Well, this phrase is just one of many when it comes to the debt of the United States, which currently sits at near $40 trillion. But what actually is the deal with U.S. debt, and can it lead to a collapse of a country? You've likely heard the figure bandied about, $36 trillion, $37 trillion. Well, as of early 2026, the total United States gross national debt is over $38.5 trillion and growing by about $6 billion every single day. It's a tool used by politicians. It's a tool used by talking heads in the media to tell you the country's going bankrupt. It's a tool used by social media to tell you the entire system's a scam. So what's the truth? Let's go back to the basics, because a lot of the alarmism out there is based on the fact that people think the debt, the deficit, and the GDP are the same thing. They're not. The debt is the total amount of money the federal government owes. That's the total debt. The deficit is the difference between how much the government spends and how much the government takes in taxes. And the GDP, the gross domestic product, is the total value of the economy. But the figure you really want to know, that's the debt to GDP ratio, which lets you know how big the debt really is in comparison to how much income the economy is capable of producing. Right now, the debt of the United States government to the public is about 100% of the total GDP. That's a very high ratio, except for the period of time during World War II. The debt itself comes in two forms. About $30 trillion is public debt, treasury bonds, treasury notes, treasury bills, and so forth. And then there's the $7.5 trillion in intragovernmental debt, which is essentially money that the government owes to itself, mostly to Social Security and Medicare. These are not even close to being similar, and no one ever bothers to clarify the difference. And then there's the money printing argument. People say the government just prints money whenever they need to. This is a common misunderstanding. The Fed is an independent organization. It's a central bank. It has nothing to do with Congress. It has nothing to do with the administration. It has nothing to do with any of those people. It's just a banking organization. And when they do quantitative easing, they buy treasury bonds. That's monetary policy. That's not government spending. Government spends money by issuing bonds. That's a completely different organization. They use completely different tools, and conflating them is where a lot of the conspiracy narratives begin. Are they lying? Mostly, they're just not explaining.
China. It has cut its holdings of U.S. Treasury bonds to the lowest level since 2008, even as global foreign ownerships of U.S. debt hit a record high.
This is one of the biggest misconceptions in American politics, and the answer to this question is totally different from the way the majority of the public thinks. Foreign governments own some of the debt, but not nearly as much as the public thinks. Japan is the largest foreign holder of U.S. debt at about $1.1 trillion. Next is China, ranking in at number 3 after the United Kingdom. Combined, foreign governments own about 23% of the total debt. The majority, more than 75%, is owned domestically by U.S. banks, pension funds, insurance companies, money market funds, and the Federal Reserve, which owns about $4.6 trillion of the debt. Americans, to a great degree, are the ones that the U.S. owes money to. Why do foreign governments buy U.S. debt to begin with? The answer is simple. Because U.S. debt is the safest place to store money anywhere in the world. When the level of uncertainty increases globally, such as during a financial crisis, pandemic, war, etc., foreign governments buy more U.S. debt. Why is the dollar the safest place to store money? It is the reserve currency, meaning that the majority of the world's trade is denominated in the dollar, including oil. Now, the famous question that is posed to the public, can China, for example, sell its debt to harm the U.S.? The answer is yes, theoretically they can. But practically, this would be one of the most self-destructive moves that the Chinese government could possibly make, as this would crash the value of the debt, meaning that the Chinese government would be losing hundreds of billions of dollars on its own debt. It would also send a message to the rest of the world that the dollar is not a safe place to store money, resulting in a global panic that would harm the Chinese economy as well. Can the United States go bankrupt? The short answer is that it can't, at least not in the way most people think. The United States has a very different situation than, say, Argentina or Greece did when they defaulted. They were saddled with foreign currency debts. They can't print money. The United States can print its currency, the dollar. It's also the world's reserve currency. This gives the United States exorbitant privilege. This means that the United States can borrow as much money as it wants at very low interest rates. It can't get into a currency crisis. Nobody else has this advantage. But the cost of that borrowed money? It's now alarmingly high. The United States paid out $879 billion in net interest on its debt in 2024. This is more than it spent on Medicare. It's more than it spent on national defense. It's now the third largest category after Social Security and healthcare. And with the CBO forecasting that its share of total outlays will continue to rise through 2028, that's a serious problem. The drama surrounding the debt ceiling? It's all a big show. It's not totally harmless. The United States did have its credit rating lowered by Fitch in 2023. This was partly due to its inability to get its act together regarding the debt ceiling. The United States doesn't need a credit card. It can print its own money. The problem is that it undermines the faith that the rest of the world has in the United States. What if the US debt isn't weakness, but dominance? The petrodollar system was put into place in the 1970s, in which the price of oil is traded in dollars. In order to trade oil, nations need dollars. In order to store dollars, nations buy US debt. This creates a self-perpetuating feedback loop in which the United States debt becomes the world's savings account. SWIFT, the global financial messaging system, runs on the dollar system. When the United States wants to put financial sanctions on a country like it did on Russia in 2022, it can essentially cut them out of the global economy in a matter of days. This is dominance that stems from the petrodollar system, which stems from the demand for US debt. It also means that the United States can pay for its military, the strongest in the world due to its spending, partly from its debt at interest rates that other nations cannot even dream of accessing. This dominance of the United States, from its aircraft carriers to its bases in other nations, is partly paid for by the debt that is supposedly killing the United States. The issues are real, as the BRICS nations are attempting to trade in their local currencies. China and Russia are selling their treasuries. However, changing the global reserve currency from the United States dollar to another currency is a decades-long process, if it ever changes at all. The system works until it doesn't, but until that point, it still does. Both sides use debt as a scare tactic when it suits them politically and ignore when it does not. They use the debt to slash social spending. They use the debt to oppose tax cuts. They have no viable solution for the long-term trajectory of the debt because the politics of fiscal policy are brutal. That's not a lie, exactly. That's a half-truth. Conspiracy theories about the debt? China owns the United States. The Fed secretly prints money to destroy the value of the dollar. The whole system is a Ponzi scheme. Are ridiculous. They do not even pass the smell test. We know that China does not own nearly as much of our debt as these theories claim. We know the Fed operates independently and publicly announces its activities. We know the debt of the United States is not the same as the debt of a household. We know a country can never be foreclosed upon. We know a country never has to pay it all back as a mortgage requires. The threat of the debt is much more subtle. A gradual erosion of faith in American institutions around the world because of our political system, our defaults, our deficits, could eventually drive interest rates up and undermine the position of the dollar as the world's reserve currency. Inflation is a silent tax that quietly eats away at the value of savings. The debt of the United States is not a bomb with a countdown clock. It's a function of our position in the world, our financial system, our politics, our faith in the system. That system exists. That system has flaws. Both of these things are true.